Hi, everybody. Katie Rife here from the AV Club, and this week on Film Club, I'm joined by a special guest. Hi, Ignatiy.
Hi, Katie.
Ignatiy Vishnevetsky will be joining me for a discussion of Universal's latest incarnation of The Invisible Man, starring Elisabeth Moss and directed by Leigh Whannell.
Welcome to Film Club.
So, Ignatiy, this is Universal's latest incarnation of The Invisible Man. It's with Blumhouse, and it's sort of in the Blumhouse tradition. Something that's been very successful for them is taking established horror tropes and properties and doing versions of them for relatively small budgets and seeing just great returns. Blumhouse, to its credit, is pretty open in creative control for its directors, and in this case, that is Leigh Whannell. And the hook in this one is something that I thought they actually played this theme very well. They make the Invisible Man the antagonist of the movie. In this film, he's a Silicon Valley billionaire who is also a diabolical, abusive psychopath. And the main character, the protagonist, is actually his partner, this abused woman who escapes from him in the beginning of the film. And I thought it was sort of a interesting take on the well-worn thriller subgenre of a woman losing her mind. And well, everyone thinks she's losing her mind, but really the threat is real, but no one believes her that the threat is real. I thought it was very interesting because usually those films take place in small spaces. Mm-hmm. They're sort of chamber pieces. And this one really expanded that into, a larger sort of palette for that type of story.
But it does it by, I think, making the movie basically a series of small space. It's a series of different set pieces.
It's a series of set pieces, but set pieces nonetheless.
Well executed set pieces. And I mean, nowadays you basically can't see a horror movie without watching some kind of metaphor for grief, family trauma, or abusive relationships.
Yeah, trauma metaphors are very hot.
That's what we really now. That's what we really go for. When we're going to a horror movie, what we really want to see is metaphors. That's what we're there for. We're there for the metaphors. But this one, I think, handles it reasonably well.
I thought so, too.
But I think really it handles it well because of the style. And you have this terrific opening that sort of sets a really, really Gothic tone to this.
Absolutely.
You've got this wonderful opening title sequence with waves crashing on rocks, and then you pan up to this kind of glass and metal and wood mansion that's, I guess, our modern equivalent of a big Gothic house.
Well, I found that kind of amusing, actually, because the layout of it and the sort of like cliffside Northern California billionaire mansion and the setup of the lab inside the mansion were pretty similar to the set design from the first Iron Man film. And so they're setting up, the Invisible Man as sort of the evil Iron Man, which was kind of fun.
And so you've got Elisabeth Moss plays the main character, Cecilia.
Cecilia,
who, in the beginning of the film, I think a really kind of well-constructed, I think it's a really terrific opening sequence.
Very good
where she escapes from his house and then sometime later learns that he has supposedly killed himself and then starts being menaced by some kind of invisible presence. And there's a part of this film where we're kind of well ahead of her. We know that there is something there, and I think there's a really savvy use of basically a lot of empty space, right? A lot of what makes this movie interesting is negative space, its absences. Kind of like we never really see the abuse that she talks about. We open at the...
She can't even talk about it.
Well, she can't really... she can't even talk about it. We kind of open at the moment of escape. And so the movie really stakes a lot of that backstory on Moss's performance.
Absolutely.
And it stakes a lot of, I think, some of its early creepiness and its early scares, not on kind of obvious things happening or, something jumping out, but really on just shots that are maybe framed a little bit too wide or these kind of pans that linger just a little bit too long.
I thought the pans were really interesting. There are a lot of shots in the film where we'll pan from Elisabeth Moss off to the left or the right, and then just look down a long, dark hallway, perhaps with a sheeted figure at the end of it or something like that. And there's a character in the film she's a teenage girl and she wants to be a fashion designer. So you have the mannequins sort of hovering menacingly in the background, which I thought was really great. But you make a great point about Elisabeth Moss's performance. We were actually discussing this last night after the screening. This is a specialty of hers, characters who are on the verge of a psychotic episode. But something... I think that her performance really grounds the film in an emotional reality of like trauma and abuse that makes the theme work, in that it's that feeling of when you have experienced, a traumatic event like this, you never feel safe. And using the invisible man, the literally unseen threat that could be there at any time, as sort of the background of the film, I think her performance underlines that in a way that makes it work.
And I think a lot of it comes back to the stuff that Leigh Whannell, who wrote and directed this, better known for his work with James Wan.
Yes,
But he also
originally
made Upgrade, which I think is pretty fun.
Yes. Upgrade. We promoted it pretty heavily on AV Club because we were all big fans of it. Yeah, Whannell, he started out, he wrote Saw for James Wan and was a screenwriter for a while, and then I think Insidious 3 was his first directorial effort. Now he's kind of breaking out on his own. He still includes little nods to his work with Wan in the film, like in everything he does. Like in this film, at one point there's a sort of a background shot where you see graffiti of Jigsaw from the Saw films. But he's doing his own thing now.
I'm guessing that some of our viewers, based on comments I've seen elsewhere, may feel that the trailer for this film gives far too much away, and that it implies that this is, kind of one of those movies where a character is, constantly trying to convince everyone that something is real, and to a point that just strains credulity. Like someone would believe them by this point. And I think that actually the film pulls it off really well, because I think it has a lot to do with the structure, especially the fact that there's a large chunk of this film that's actually set over a very short span of time.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really let the thing go on for too long.
The whole thing, even backstory that informs the story, it's all about like a month. I think it all takes place over a very short time.
And there's a middle section that's basically just set over a few hours. But I also like that it's not just about this presence that's menacing her. A big part of what the invisible man is doing is making it seem like she's doing particular things, kind of making it seem like either she's doing things to herself or that she's doing things to other people.
He's gaslighting her.
Yeah. Now, there are, I think, some issues with pacing toward the end of the film, but to me, like the middle section of it, which is kind of a chamber set, like a long series of chamber set pieces, works really well. The opening works really well. There are parts of this film that are basically Elisabeth Moss and some kind of threat. Long stretches of the film without any dialogue, which is also kind of unusual for a mainstream horror film. The sound design in this is pretty terrific.
Yeah, the sound design is fantastic. There's one part where Moss, she's convinced that her supposedly dead ex is in the room, and just the sound design that he does with a sheet, where she's shaking a sheet, is just really good. Like, very scary stuff.
Yeah. I should say that this is scary. I was surprised to find that it's very effectively scary. There's a point where the person next to me let out a yelp, which is interesting because they've been making movies about the Invisible Man for almost 90 years, and it's taken this long to make one that's really legitimately a horror movie.
Yeah.
If you look at something like Hollow Man, which I think has a lot going, there's some things about Hollow Man that really don't work, but Hollow Man sort of also establishes this idea of just the Invisible Man as an abusive asshole. It also does something which this film doesn't do, which is that it really does a good job of queasily implicating the viewer in the Invisible Man's point of view, in the whole power fantasy of screwing with people and, of being a voyeur, which this doesn't.
This film is 100% on Cecilia's side.
Yeah.
They don't give any backstory to, his name's Adrian, the Invisible Man. They don't give him any backstory, anything. He's just pure evil. One thing that I thought was interesting is, like I said, Whannell is relatively new, breaking out on his own after enjoying this partnership with Wan for a long time. He's definitely, I think, even just with these past two films he's done, he's developing a distinctive visual style.
Oh yeah, he loves symmetry. There's so many symmetrical shots in this film, and he actually uses the symmetry quite well when he kind of breaks it a little bit. Like a room will be framed symmetrically, and then something is going to happen, in a corner of it to the right. And he also, you mentioned this, but he has kind of a distinctive special effect that he does, or a distinctive digital effect that he does, which is, kind of the character moving or falling back and kind of the whole frame appearing to move with them.
Yeah, it's something that he did a lot in Upgrade, and I they've worked out some sort of way to do it practically where it's sort of like a steady cam, but it's attached to the actor. And even with the pans we were talking about, those are very robotic.
Yeah.
His camera movements are very like mechanical, which is a very interesting counterpart to, a story that is very psychological and messy, emotionally. There were a few things about it. I agree that I liked the sort of descent into madness part a lot. And in the second half, there were certain parts where it got a little bit, it played a little bit loose in ways that I was surprised by. Just little things like I don't need a movie to be completely anchored in reality, but it's so focused on forward momentum in the latter half that there were a few details that I felt got left by the side a little bit.
I mean, it's not free of plot holes,
Yeah.
and there are some characters whose relationships seem incredibly vague to one another. And, I do ultimately feel like it doesn't, the ending feels a little bit arbitrary, even though something kind of, big might happen in it. It does feel arbitrary. I mean, for everything that it's doing so well formally and for all of these missteps it's not making, I think it ultimately succumbs to a lot of problems with quote-unquote mainstream horror, which is that it's engaging some irrational fear of ours. Like there's someone I can't see in my house, or someone that hurt me is actually still alive. And then finding really rational explanations for them, irrational within the context of horror, and then ultimately explaining all of those things. I do like the fact that it's not like it plays for a very long time with this idea that it's just all in her head. I mean, we know that there's something there before she does.
No, it's 100% on her side, with her. She is right. Everyone else is wrong. And I think that that's where this film is most successful, is sort of as like an emotional experience, because there is a lot of tension to it and a lot of atmosphere. And even when it does kind of stumble a little bit, I think the forward momentum is still there. All right, everybody, that's it for The Invisible Man. Thank you for joining us, Ignatiy. It's always good to see you.
Well, thank you for having me. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel.
Thanks, everybody.